Norfolk has always had a long-running relationship with the sea, for its food, to its commerce, and at times its defence. And as you will have seen if you have watched this channel for a while, no shortage of ships that have met their fate in those dark, uncaring waters of the North Sea, claiming many lives. All tragedies in their own right, but none of these have seemingly come as close to changing the course of the history of the country than the sinking of HMS Gloucester in 1682. The world that brought forth the building of the Gloucester was a changing time for the country. Ordered in December 1652, just over a year after the end of the long and bitterly fought decade of the English civil wars, monarchy had fallen and Oliver Cromwell, soon to be named Lord Protector, ruled the Commonwealth of England and Scotland, later to add Ireland to this as well, and on land was efficiently and brutally suppressing rebellions, royalist holdouts, and all who opposed him. But he knew, even if he brought his problems at home under control, attention and threats from outside the country would have to be faced at sea. Between the major naval powers in Europe, a sort of arms race had been going on for decades now, all based around navies that had started during the rule of Henry VIII. And there were three main foes now that England may have to face at sea. Two were their traditional enemies, although at the time was an uneasy alliance, France and Spain. But now there was a third rising force to their east, that of the Dutch. And if it came that they must fight one or all of them, they would need a sizable fleet. Among the ships ordered was the Gloucester, as part of the 1652 naval programme, built in the Limehouse dockyards in Deptford, London, under the expert direction of Master Shipwright Matthew Graves. Construction seems to have lasted somewhere between 13 and 16 months, and she was launched in March 1554. She was a third-rate Speaker-class frigate, fitted with three fully rigged masts, coming to 35.7 metres long and 10.6 metres wide, with a tonnage of 755. She was built to carry 50 guns, although it seems at some point they were able to fit 57 on board, and all costing £5,473. She would not have a very illustrious career, with 3 battle honours to her name, all of them against the Dutch. The first being the 4 Days' Battle, from the 1st to the 4th of June 1666, off the coast of Northumberland in Kent, during the Second Anglo-Dutch War. By now, the Commonwealth that had paid for her construction had fallen, and the monarchy had returned, now under the rule of Charles II, making her HMS Gloucester. The 4-day running battle that went from the Flemish coast to the waters off Kent is one of the longest engagements in naval history, and despite not being able to break fully through and destroy the English fleet, was a hard-won Dutch victory, leading to the loss of 10 English ships to the cost of 4 of their own. 1,000 killed, including 2 admirals, and 2,000 taken prisoner, to the Dutch losses of 1,500 killed and 1,300 wounded. The next was the Battle of Solebay, off the coast of Southwold in Suffolk, and a battle we might cover more in detail at a later date, taking place on the 7th of June 1672. She was part of a combined French and English fleet, sailing with Blue Squadron, commanded by William Coleman. The battle was largely inconclusive, with the loss of 1 ship on each side and 1 additional Dutch ship captured. The next and final battle to her name was Sugarland, a 2-part battle fought in the North Sea on the 7th and 14th of June 1673. This one part of the Franco-Dutch War, another Dutch victory and a key battle that prevented English and French forces from invading the Netherlands. In 1677, she underwent a refit, which increased her firepower to 60 guns, to aid what was now a slightly ageing warship. By the 1680s, England was once again stood on rather uneasy ground. Charles II was getting older and had no legitimate heirs to take the throne on his death, and next in line fell to his younger brother, James, Duke of York. And this would not have been a huge problem had James not been a Catholic, and with the wounds of the Reformation still far from healed within the country, this led many to distrust him, with James even having to flee the country in the 1670s for his own safety. But as the 1680s rolled round, it soon became clear that something had to be done to try and ingratiate him with the English. By now he was living in Scotland, so Charles invited him to England to show his face and rebuild bridges. James agreed, and the pair met with their entourages at Newmarket races, before moving south to spend time in London. After some time in the capital, James wished to be joined by his wife, Duchess Mary, and wanted to fetch her personally and bring her to London. Charles agreed, and never one to miss a celebration, wanted to send his brother off in style, and show the court and the public that he was the rightful future king. He would leave from the Thames as part of a huge river pageant, down to Margate, where he would be escorted north by 10 ships, 4 royal yachts, and 6 ships from the English fleet. After this grand procession to the river of the capital and reaching Margate, James was welcomed with full honours aboard the ship that would take him north, HMS Gloucester. And with this begins her final voyage, Friday the 6th of May 1682. They wished to make good time and make the most of the wind they had, so all sails were unfurled. An HMS Gloucester in full sail that day must have been an unforgettable sight, with the Royal Standard also flying from her mainmast to denote their most important passenger. Sailing north with James were several noblemen as well as other notable figures, including the up-and-coming military commander John Churchill, Robert Kerr, 3rd Earl of Roxburgh, and many, many others. But as they made their way along the Norfolk coast on a journey that should have been a simple and fairly easy-going one, the ship's captain, named Sir John Berry, was not a happy man. They had taken a pilot on to help them through the challenging waters, and the pair had disagreed heavily on the course they should take. Berry wanted to stay further out to sea and play it safe. This plan was also backed by 2 other officers on board who were there to escort the Duke, Captain Gunman and a Captain Saunders, while the pilot, a Captain James Eyre, wished to stay closer to the shore. Normally, in this situation, the ship's captain would have been as good as law, but given their knowledge of the local seas, pilots were the only men who could tell a captain what to do. So Berry was forced to admit defeat and relent to Eyre's plan, who was meant to be one of the most skilled and knowledgeable seamen when it came to this area of the coast at the time. The waters around Great Yarmouth were dangerous enough at the best of times with their hidden sandbanks, but added to this now was the strong wind that was picking up. So much so that 2 men had been tasked to man the ship's wheel, rather than the normal one. James Eyre gave the order to take the ship closer into shore. The 2 men dutifully turned the wheel. The fate of both of them, and HMS Gloucester, had been sealed. Those on board, especially among the royal party, had little idea what dangers they were sailing into, so life carried on much as normal. The Duke and most of his fellow nobles were still in their cabins. Among them was the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, Sir James Fleming, whose account makes up much of what we know about the sinking. It was around 5:30 in the morning when HMS Gloucester suddenly came to a crashing halt. Men were thrown to the ground all over the ship, and the force of the impact sent the ship's rudder hard to port, leading to the ship's wheel spinning unexpectedly, killing both of the helmsmen instantly. It would not have been clear what they had hit right away, as despite the sandbank being clearly shown in paintings of the incident, this is artistic license, as in reality it was still 12 feet under water. It's not exactly known how this incident came about. It may have been a stronger wind than expected, forcing the ship out of the deeper channels and onto the sand, or possibly the pilot had misread his chart positions. But either way, HMS Gloucester had run aground hard on what was known as the Lemon and Oar sandbank, a long, narrow ridge of sand that rose within 3 fathoms of the surface, with deep water on either side. The ship was stuck fast, and was being battered by the tide from one direction, and a growing wind from the other. Soon the whole vessel began to rock side to side, ominously creaking and cracking as she did. The crew worked hard to try and save her, but all their actions would turn out to be in vain. In the fight to free her, her rudder broke away, making her uncontrollable even if they had got her off the sand. And worse, the hull of the ship was now being badly damaged and taking on water. Within just a few minutes of the crash, the lower planks of the ship were being forced apart by the movement, and the sea came pouring in. As the crew fought to try and save their vessel, there was little the Duke and other passengers could do than try and keep out of the way, and wait for word from Captain Berry on whether they were going to stay with the ship or not. They would have watched eagerly, as who to them probably looked like any other sailor came scurrying from below decks and up to the captain, before saluting him and reporting the situation. In reality, this sailor was one of the most valuable men on board, the ship's carpenter, and the news he brought from below decks was grave. Water had already reached 9 feet within the ship's hold and was rising fast. There was nothing that could be done. HMS Gloucester was effectively lost. Captain Berry knew his first duty must be getting the Duke to safety, but he didn't have much time, nor was he going to be able to save all of James's entourage. He called for the Duke's private launch, the boat that would have brought him to HMS Gloucester, to be lowered to just below his cabin window, first making it easier for the Duke to board it, and also in hopes that getting his most important passenger away unnoticed would help keep the crew under control, and not run the risk of the Duke's boat being swamped or capsized by fleeing men. He passed his plan to the Duke of York, who is said to have remained calm throughout. He chose from his party the men he most needed to join him. Among them was the Lord President of the Court of Session and John Churchill. But he also made sure there was room left on the boat for his strong box of valuables, his dogs and his personal priest. He bid farewell and wished the best of luck to those they were unable to make room for, and was led to his boat by trusted men armed with swords, given orders to keep back anyone who tried to board themselves. This done, James was soon lowered down and rowed away from the doomed vessel. Despite the roughness of the seas, they were very quickly picked up by one of the royal yachts, the Mary, that was waiting for them. With the Duke now safely away, Captain Berry gave the order to abandon ship, and not a moment too soon. A shift in either the wind or the tide forced her from the sandbank and into the deeper waters, and now she began to sink fast. Both his greatest fears were now realised. One, that the Gloucester would indeed break up and sink before nearby ships were able to rescue them, and the second, that realising this, panic set in throughout the whole crew. Sir James Fleming, one of the men not chosen by the Duke to join them, was forced to climb down a rope to reach one of the ship's boats as it was being launched, only to realise that he was being followed by dozens of the ship's crew. Throwing themselves over the side and desperately swimming for the small boat as they pushed themselves off and tried to leave. And soon they were being swamped by men, later writing, "We were so overloaded that every moment we thought to have been drowned. A great many swimming for their lives caught a death grip on our boat, holding their heads above the water and crying for help. We had perforce to loose their hands, telling them that they would otherwise lose both themselves and us. Yet even this would not make them loose their grip, till they were forced off by several men in our boat and left to drown." Freeing themselves and making for the ships heading towards them, they looked back at the wreck that had once been their ship, now fully broken up, her topmast and royal standard still flying, slipping beneath the waves of the North Sea forever. But even after this they were not safe. They now had to run the risk of trying to board another ship in heavy swell. It pleased God to bring us wonderfully near to a ship's side, the Captain Saunders, whose crew had dare not come too close to our foundering vessel for fear of being wrecked on the same sandbank. We were like to have been crushed to pieces by it, by reason of the great seas running. At length, however, a rope was cast overboard, which was so managed that we were brought to her lee side. Then every man climbed for his life, and so did I, taking hold of the rope until I was hauled in. It is unknown exactly how many lost their lives in the sinking. Record keeping was bad at the best of times during this period, and not helped by how much has just been lost over the centuries. Once again, James Fleming gives us his prediction on the losses. There were about 250 seamen on board the man-of-war Gloucester, and I'm sure there were 80 noblemen, gentlemen, and their servants. My computation is that there were about 350 in all, of which I cannot learn that more than 130 were afterwards found alive. Among the dead was Robert Kerr and O'Donoghue O'Brien, an Irish nobleman. James, the Duke of York, became James II of England and James VII of Scotland on the 23rd of April, 1685, crowned in Westminster Abbey, and was a much more hands-on and involved king than his more party-favouring brother had ever been. But his rule was not to be a long one, as what many feared began to happen. He started to reintroduce Catholic ideas to the Church of England, leading to several noblemen calling for William, Prince of Orange of the Netherlands, and a Protestant, to come and claim the throne, starting what became known as the Glorious Revolution. He agreed, and James soon found his kingdom collapsing around him. Many of his most respected officers, and even his own daughter, switched sides on him. He eventually fled to France, and William was crowned William III, King of England, on the 11th of April, 1689. James would attempt to take his kingdom back, which led to the Williamite War in Ireland, but in the end he would return to exile in France, and died on the 16th of September, 1701, aged 67. John Churchill, one of James's hand-picked survivors, went on to be one of the most celebrated army commanders of his day, becoming the Duke of Marlborough for his actions, and is an ancestor of Winston Churchill. He was also one of the officers that switched sides to join William during the Revolution. There is of course much more to both his life and the revolution that led to the fall of James, but these are well beyond the scope of this channel. John Berry, the ship's captain, survived the wreck and was one of the last to leave her, escaping by rope over her stern into a small boat from one of the other ships that had come to pick up survivors. The pilot, Captain James Eyre, also survived the sinking, in fact being picked up by the same ship that rescued James Fleming. He was arrested the moment he was pulled from the sea, and later stood trial for his actions and was dismissed from the service. Today, the wreck of the HMS Gloucester lays among the sandbanks that have claimed so many lives off the coast of Great Yarmouth, laying at a depth of 28 metres. As shown in this video, the sinking was immortalised by several paintings, most of which are now in the care of the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. Also, from my research for this video, seems to be somewhat of a conspiracy theory that the sinking may have taken place deliberately in an attempt to assassinate James, but I've been able to find very little information other than this theory exists. So unfortunately we will have to leave that here for now, but if I ever do find anything else I may make a follow-up video for it. The latest information I've been able to find out about the wreck is about 10 years old now, with a discussion going on in the House of Lords about placing an official protection order on the site, but if anything has ever come of this, I do not know. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was the sinking of HMS Gloucester, and this was a little bit of history.